We are here on Wednesday. It's the day after election night, but in California, it can be an election week or whatnot. And we're happy to be joined by the host of The Issue Is, Elex Michaelson. You can watch him on our Fox 58 station at 6:30 every Sunday morning, of course, on his YouTube page as well, Elex Michaelson on YouTube. We were talking about sleep schedules, not too great on your end either. You're at 2.5 hours, I think.
Yeah, something like that. It's a lot of excitement, but this is the fun time and I wouldn't do it any other way.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we did not have to stay up terribly late for was the call of the presidential race. I had been speaking to a number of analysts who were talking about the fact that, hey, you can go on several days. If anything, it's going to be a Harris win. This is what some of these polls indicated that the way that the polling margins had looked like it was favoring her for an early race call. But at the end of the night, it ended up being the former president who was called by Fox News earliest as the winner of this race. What was your impression from last night?
Well, he finished speaking at midnight, so it wasn't exactly early, but but in terms of
Early
what
by
was
2020 standards.
in terms of what was predicted, it was early. It felt a lot more like 2016 than 2020. This feeling of sort of inevitability by the end of the night as well, that Trump was headed there, and just this Democratic freakout that was underway. I think there were a lot of people that thought that maybe Trump could win. I don't think anybody really predicted that he would win the popular vote, that there would be this, red wave or red tsunami that we saw all across the country, even in places like California, Republicans overperforming where you would expect them to be, which is the opposite of what most people would think, and the opposite of what we've seen during the entire Trump era of American politics. For every election except for 2016, Republicans have underperformed, especially when Trump wasn't on the ballot. But in this election, Republicans overperforming.
And everyone was focused on the big seven swing states, the two in the West with Arizona and Nevada, the three through the Midwest with Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and of course, the two in the South, North Carolina and Georgia. And as of now, he has five of those under his belt. We're still waiting on Arizona and Nevada, but what do you make of his performance there in those states? Because the margins are just about as thin as the polls projected, somewhere within that margin of error. But in the same regards, he's won five of them.
I think he did better than we were expecting for the polls. I mean, the fact that he is in place to potentially win every single swing state is a remarkable feat, and one of the most incredible political comebacks in the history of politics. Think about this: January 7th, 2021, Donald Trump was defeated, headed for political exile, was about to be impeached, and potentially convicted, where he wouldn't be able to run for anything ever again. Most Republicans at that point were abandoning him in droves. In the years since, he had 91 criminal indictments. And despite all of that, he has now brought the entire Republican Party together, expanded his base, and now is going to win with a bigger margin than he did in 2016. It is remarkable to essentially go from a politically dead to very much alive. And think about the stakes of this election. If Donald Trump would have lost, he potentially would have been headed for jail time. His next step for him would be a prosecution. Now he heads to the White House with extraordinary power, the Supreme Court behind him, Republican Senate behind him, and possibly the House behind him as well.
And then we know the Republican will have an executive in that top branch there with the former president becoming the president-elect. We know that the Senate is already at maybe 51, 52 senators for right now for the Republicans, and there's still the ability to increase to as much as 55. And as far as the House is going to be close. It's going to be up for grabs, and the House runs through, it seems, California. Several races undecided here in this state. I think it's at least 15 at the moment. Can you talk to us about the importance of these House races and maybe how long we'll have to wait for them?
Yeah, well, you'd rather be in the Republicans' perspective than the Democrats right now. Last night, late at night, many of the Democrats were up in those close House races. You wake up early this morning, Republicans are up in those races. We'll see which way things break. In the past, often it has broken for the Democrats when more ballots have been counted, but we'll see if that changes this time. There's a huge difference between a Republican House and a Democratic House, given the fact there's a Republican president and a Republican Senate. If there's a Democratic House, they can be a backstop to Donald Trump on everything that he wants to do. They'll have subpoena power and be able to investigate him. The House controls the purse, so they'll be in control of negotiating whether they want to do more tax cuts or regulation or all the rest of that. Hakeem Jeffries would have a seat at the table for all of the key negotiations, including funding the government itself. If they don't win and there's a Republican House, Democrats are basically shut out. They've got almost no power, and Donald Trump can essentially do almost whatever he wants. The Democrats would say, well, let's stop him in the courts. But he's got the Supreme Court on his side, and he's got a very real possibility if Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito or another justice decided to retire, or God forbid, one of the Democratic justices died, and then they've got an ability to lock in Supreme Court justices for the next 40 years. So you could, at the end of this next term, have at least 5 Trump-appointed Supreme Court justices on the bench for the next 4 decades.
And in the Senate race that we're looking at in particular with Arizona, it seems like this is the case of Trump outperforming his matching candidate, which would be Kari Lake in Arizona. And that's not too big of a surprise. And I think what was interesting about that, too, we talked about this earlier, but the fact that some of those candidates that are a little bit more controversial, like Lake or like Robinson, who was a governor candidate in North Carolina who had some significant baggage, they didn't bring him down in a lot of these races.
They didn't, right? That's true. Robinson is historically bad and has a whole lot of other issues. And Kari Lake has been a pretty disappointing candidate now, both in her race for governor and her race for senator. But yes, Donald Trump has outperformed his MAGA supporters and proteges in almost every ballot. There's something about him that brings his base out where they're not necessarily willing to go out for some of the people that he endorses in off-year elections. But Trump was able to bring a lot of people with him in terms of coattails, and Republicans did far better on the Senate map than even was expected. I think everybody expected the Republicans to win the Senate based off of the numbers, but maybe with a 1 or 2 vote majority, it's possible they could have a 5 or 6 seat majority when this whole thing is done.
Yeah, and to give people an idea, I mean, you had those 2 tough Democratic incumbents in Republican states with John Tester up in Montana and then also Sherrod Brown in Ohio. And you saw those flips there. I mean, they seemed like they were invincible even in red states, and they've seemed to be able to hold on for so long. Even Moreno was not considered the strongest Republican Senate candidate that they could have offered, but he was able to beat one of the most popular figures in Ohio's political history, which was pretty remarkable. I want to ask you, too, about how is Trump reaching these other voters? I know a lot of people can just go and point simply to the economy, but as we're doing a podcast as opposed to our normal news operations that we normally do every night in the evenings, was his ability to reach people on media and alternative forms of media impacting in this race and this decision?
Of course. I mean, if you look at it at the end of the day, especially the last month and a half of the election, I don't think Trump did any national mainstream news interviews where he would sit down with somebody and answer tough questions. I mean, Harris was doing it all the time. She sat down. I mean, she got so much flack for not doing it early on, but in the end, she sat down with Bret Baier. She sat down with Norah O'Donnell. She was doing different mainstream media interviews. Trump said, F it, I don't need it. He's sitting down for podcasts with bros. He was sitting down with Joe Rogan, an interview that reached 40 or 50 million people. He was going about things in a different way, which allowed him to control the message more. It allowed him to not be pinned down by reporters as much. And it allowed him to reach people who don't typically pay attention to the evening news anyways. I think that there's a real question to be had at the end of this about the impact of celebrities or lack thereof. Did some of these celebrity endorsements actually hurt Kamala Harris by making her appear more out of touch when the big issue was affordability for most voters? And did Trump basically giving the middle finger to the media help him as well? For a lot of people who have tuned out the traditional way that they used to get news.
And my last few questions for you, I want to focus it back to California and the propositions. I think the biggest one that most people were taking a close look at was Proposition 36 across the state. That one, of course, upgrading several offenses to felonies. It was a bit of a criminal justice reform. What was your thoughts on that? It seemed to match the polling, which showed 70-30, and it looks like it's about 70-30 statewide.
I mean, we were all sort of shocked when we saw the first poll on that a couple months ago that suggested that it was 70-30, and that's where the voters actually are, which gives you another indication. Speaking of middle fingers, that was a bit of California voters giving a middle finger to the Democratic establishment here. You think about it, Governor Newsom and almost all of the state's legislative leaders are all saying no on 36, and California voters overwhelmingly saying, yeah, we don't care. We're going yes. A lot of people just fed up with crime, with images of going into a drugstore and seeing a bunch of products locked up, seeing all the images on the nightly news and on social media of all the smash and grabs, seeing the drug use on the streets with homeless people, and wanting to do something, anything that was proposed to change that up. And so that is, I think, a cautionary tale for the Democrats who run this state, that they may not be in line with the voters on this issue. And it is an important issue for them.
And then can you give us a quick run through of these House races that are outstanding around California? You've talked to just about everybody, but let's focus on the Los Angeles ones or Los Angeles area ones. It seems like
Sure.
Orange County has quite a few that you've spoken with both candidates on, and they are still yet to be called.
Yes. We talk in Orange County. There's the race to defeat or to replace Katie Porter in Congress. Her handpicked successor is State Senator Dave Min. He's running against Scott Baugh, the Republican who ran against Porter last time. That race too close to call. One race that a lot of people weren't looking at until the final weeks when polls showed it getting close was incumbent Republican Michelle Steele running against Derek Tran. That's a district that has a very large Vietnamese population. That race is close, although Steele starting to pull away a little bit in that race. One that got extraordinary amount of money spent on it in terms of ads was in Riverside County. Ken Calvert, the longest serving Republican House member from California, been there since 1993, running against Will Rollins, a millennial, openly gay, former federal prosecutor. And that race is close. And finally, perhaps the most vulnerable Democrat, just based off of the registration of the district, is or most vulnerable Republican, I should say, is Mike Garcia, who's running in northern LA County against George Whitesides. That race very close as well. Right now, though, Republicans are ahead in all of the close races in Southern California. It is possible that that flips. I spoke with some of the Democratic leadership this morning who suggested that there's still a path for the Democrats to win the House. But right now, if you had to bet, the Republicans have a better path than the Democrats do.
And last question, of course. I mean, your show this week, who knows? Is it in flux with what's going on? You're still paying attention closely on these results, and I know there's other things that can happen. What can we expect this week on the issue is?
I think we're going to be talking with Adam Schiff, the new senator elect from California, who now is going to be going back and forth, I imagine, with Donald Trump. It elevates his profile as he comes into the Senate as one of Trump's big targets. We're going to have a panel with Katie Porter, who ran against Adam Schiff, and Peter Hamby of Puck News, who's one of the smartest people on this, and who knows what else. I think we're going to be talking later today with Pete Aguilar, who is the chair of the House Democrats as well. I'm also going to be talking with Nathan Hochman, who just defeated George Gascon for LA County DA. So there's a lot of interviews to go through and a lot to discuss. It's going to be hard to fit all that into a 22-minute show, but we can fit more on YouTube and the podcast and all the rest of it. So I hope people will check out all my socials for some of that.
Yeah, halfway through your guest list, I was thinking, 22 minutes. 22 minutes. Best of luck to you. But that's the great thing about social
got lots
media,
of platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, you can share the rest of that stuff that you do from those interviews, so it always works out
Yeah.
just well. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I know you didn't get much sleep. Hope you get some more sometime this week, and if not, next week.
Yeah, probably not. But thanks. Well, appreciate it.